Business Weekly, brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.
Ahead on this edition of KTN Business Weekly, we look at the planned migration from analog to digital broadcast platform. We also talk to seasoned film producer Ingolo Wakea on the executive wing. Remember that you can send your questions, observations or comments to the SMS number 8041 or email address ktnbizweekly@standardmedia.co.ke. Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of KTN Business Weekly. I'm Michael Oyer. The switch from analog to digital broadcasting is in the offing with a target set for December this year. The Communications Commission of Kenya expects that Kenyan households will have embraced the enhanced television watching. But the fact on the ground is that a majority of Kenyans are not aware of exactly what's expected of them before the big switch. Will the switch be smooth?
The period between now and 2015 is a critical one in which serious and resolute action must be taken if we are to remain relevant in the broadcasting world. Already, the die is cast with the world's telecommunication body, International Telecommunication Union, issuing a deadline for country members to complete migration process, after which there will be no more protections against interference. The Geneva 2006 agreement set 17 June 2015 as the date after which countries may use those frequencies currently assigned for analog television transmission for digital services without being required to protect analog services of neighboring countries against interference. This date is generally viewed as an internationally mandated analog switch-off date, at least along the national boundaries.
We are even ahead of schedule. The problem is that the uptake for set-top boxes has not been as fast as we would want. But with respect to coverage, we have covered 70% of the population. And you know the current analog covers about 80%. So by December, we would have actually covered more than 80% of the population.
Digital migration is viewed as probably going to be one of the most disruptive technologies. And yet, there are actually some basics we can address. For example, if you have a black and white TV or a current TV set in your home, what do you actually need to actually migrate? What you need is a simple set-top box. For example, a GoTV box or any other such a set-top box. You then go home, provided the digital signal is actually in your area, because it's a terrestrial signal. In many of these cases, you use a stop antenna. You don't even have to sort of put anything on the roof. And you get a signal and you connect, and you then get your free-to-air channels, for example.
Why all the fuss about the digital migration? Well, the thing about the digital migration with television per se, which hasn't been a fuss with telephones, it hasn't been a fuss with mobile phones, it's a fuss for television because the number of frequencies that are out there is relatively limited. There's only so much radio spectrum in the world, and there are only so much of that spectrum which is allocated by the ITU for television. And television, because you're transmitting pictures and the quality of the pictures is there's an ever-increasing demand for better and better quality of pictures, because people are watching more and more television and they're watching more and more sport or movies or things of high caliber, high definition.
Arising from the Geneva Regional Radio Conference organized by ITU in 2006, where it was agreed that member countries must ensure television broadcasters conclude shifting to digital migration by 2015. Broadcasting regulators in the continent were aroused and came up with a more tasking targets based on individual capacity, with countries in the continent coming up with specific migration targets earlier than the 2015 date.
Once you get spectrum released from, say, sections of broadcasting, you then can get other data services, sort of 4G, LTE type of services by mobiles. So it's a whole new sort of avenue in terms of opportunity.
we keep on studying how the course of migration. And one thing we discovered was that the set-top boxes that we were prescribing for people to buy were actually too elitist, meaning they were too expensive. At $50, very few Kenyans can afford.
What the ITU did was they way back when they came out with some guidelines, and the ITU is part of the UN, and they came out with some guidelines where they said to member nations, look, our recommendation is that you follow this timetable to persuade people to start using digital frequencies or digital technology for television, and then stop using analog technology for television.
This migration became necessary as a result of development in telecommunication technologies, which enable more efficient use of radio frequency spectrums, as well as better quality pictures and sound. The switch over to digital broadcasting will also offer clear advantages for both consumers and operators. These advantages stem from the fact that it is possible to process and compress digital data in a more efficient manner than was the case for analog signals. Digital broadcasting gives a wider choice of programs from a greater number of channels and radio stations, and improved flexibility of use as a result of better portable and mobile reception.
Lack of awareness always creates urban legend, confusion, rumors. These things are allowed to happen where there's lack of control and lack of awareness, and really what there needs to be is much more awareness. I personally, I think it's absolutely wrong that some pay TV operators are confusing the picture by suggesting implicitly in their advertising that in order to go digital you have to subscribe for a pay TV service. It's not true. It's distorting the truth.
Obviously for the players, you then have a chance to actually have more players, more TV channels at play, either pay or actually free to air. And for the public, they actually have a big chance to actually have a variety of channels. Other than sort of having a limited, say 20 channels in Nairobi, they now can do 20 times 20. So you can see the sort of scale you can get.
If you go to CCK, they will tell you that they have licensed a lot of newcomers into broadcast. Some of them are going to do vernacular broadcast. This is one that is going to drive, because always we say content will drive uptake of digital migration.
To enjoy these benefits, and given the set deadline by ITU, African countries have since swung into action, unveiling roadmaps and strategies to achieving seamless migration before 2015. Interestingly, many have gone a step further and set their own deadlines, which are earlier than the ITU date. And with this, one is tempted to conclude that Africa will definitely meet the ITU deadline. But unfortunately, stories emanating from across the continent do not suggest that African countries are likely to meet the 2015 target, let alone the self-imposed deadline, with Kenya leading the pack of countries that have failed to meet its own self-imposed deadlines of June 2012, with the atmosphere rife with doubts and pessimism.
One of the problems in the field in itself, because what has happened is what we used to call, or what we call, broadcast and telecommunications have become one thing. We call it, we're in a converged environment, meaning that competition is going to come from somewhere else, not the traditional competition that we used to know. For example, I'm sure Google is going to come with a lot of web TV, which is going to cause havoc in the market.
Someone once said before that Kenyans have got these unique, peculiar consuming habits. So perhaps they're aware, but they're actually waiting for the last minute to then come. And I think over time, there are going to be those distress messages to say, migrate, otherwise you're actually going to get your analog signal. You have to go to digital.
In Africa generally, pundits have rated the migration process as slow, a development which has been attributed to factors such as poor funding, lack of awareness, and challenges of getting equipment, capacity building, and social problems associated with public understanding of the process. These have further increased the level of doubt as to the practicability of this migration among stakeholders in the industry, less than 4 years into the ITU deadline. Will Africa be able to navigate through the hurdles in its way to achieve these targets? Whichever way, the fact remains that the continent must move with the rest of the world and go digital. This time around is not negotiable.
We must get into local content because we are going to be swamped. Already broadcasters are showing us Nigerian film and they are calling it local. And we would ask the inspectors to even look at the accent to determine that this is truly local.
I think content is probably going to be the next game in terms of really differentiation in media. What you'll actually get is people will increasingly have to develop more local content. People will have to actually, players and operators in media will have to understand what are the audiences looking for. Because it's not about content that you like, it's about content which customers like.
There are two problems. There's a supply side problem and a demand side problem. The supply side problem is, can you produce enough content? But actually, well, you can do anything you like, right? If you pay me enough money, I can produce content for 100 channels. It's actually the demand side problem that comes in is who's going to pay for it, right? How are you going to pay to produce 100 channels worth of 24 hours a day content?
For government and industry, digital television reallocates the radio spectrum so that it can be auctioned off by the government. In the subsequent auction, telecommunication industries can introduce new services and products in mobile telephony, Wi-Fi internet, and other nationwide telecommunication projects.
A hierarchy to digital broadcasting, right? The cheapest, call it the tuk-tuk, is digital terrestrial. It's cheap, it's free, but it's also the lowest quality. Then the next quality up is satellite TV. Satellite is much higher quality.
I mean, one of the reasons, and I would beg that everybody moved on to this platform and begins to do content, is the capacity now to actually have teachers teaching on that platform to everybody throughout the country. And this is where you find in rural areas where kids have no books, you can actually share now. You have a shared knowledge platform. We can get our older generation to come and talk about our culture.
At the moment, Kenya has licensed 2 digital distributors to join Signet, a subsidiary of the state-owned Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. Already, the Ministry of Information and Communication has asked Treasury to zero-rate digital set-top boxes to make them affordable. A set-top box is an equipment that enables analog TV set to receive digital signals.
In the process of the digital migration, all of these things, for reasons best known to the people doing it, have become confused, deliberately confused by companies who want to make money, and they're saying, subscribe to us so that you can be digital migration. It's a nonsense. Digital migration has got nothing to do with pay TV.
So far, analysts in Kenya broadcasting industry have expressed doubt on the country's ability to meet the target, citing irreconcilable differences between the government and media owners as impediments.
In terms of awareness, it is a new development. It is a development that arose from the Geneva GEO6 declaration that actually said all countries globally have to migrate from analog transmission to digital transmission.
Currently, analog broadcasting is protected from interference, but this protection will stop by 2015. It is therefore necessary for all countries to complete the migration from analog to digital by 2015. However, Kenyans need to understand that after the switch over is completed, your analog TV set is not obsolete.
Time for a break now, but when we return, Ingolo Wakea, the executive producer at Silver Spring Pictures, is our guest on the executive wing. Stay with KTN Business Weekly. Welcome back. The planned digital migration will not only affect media houses, but also local film producers. Tonight on the executive wing, we talk to Ingolo Wakea, the executive director and producer at the Silver Spring Pictures, on what to expect from the film industry ahead of the digital migration.
This week on the executive wing, we are joined by Ngolo Wakea, who's the executive producer and director at the Silver Spring Pictures. Welcome to the show. Mr. Ngolo, Kenya has made some milestones in the production of TV content from the early 80s. What are some of the expectations as we move from the analog production to digital production?
Yeah, maybe if you can just begin by saying that definitely television has been with us for a very long time. But I think amongst the East African countries, I think we are the first country to be to have television. Of course, starting at that time, which was basically the broadcasting of television, whether it was news gathering, it was actually it was actually done on film. I would say right from the beginning, let's say in the 60s and the 70s, we had a lot of local programs. We had quite a number of local programs, and these were mainly the comedies that we used to hear of. Akina Adhumani, Kipanga, Mzee Pembe. Those are the kind of programs actually that used to grace our our local TV stations. So I would say in terms of television, it has actually been the growth has been big, although it could have been bigger because we had a very big capacity in terms of local technical capacity, and even creative capacity, But just because we had only one station up to the 80s, not many of Kenyan local programs actually were being made. But at least now the opening up of this, of the airwaves to allowing more TV stations to come in actually opened opportunities for more programs, for more producers, to come on board.
As we move from analog transmission to the digital transmission, what are some of the opportunities that will be there for the Kenyan producers in terms of production of content, which we know the Communication Commission of Kenya had put at 40% for media houses? Do you think we'll be able to meet it?
Actually, what digital migration actually promises is that there'll be more signals. That means will not be restricted to the few that we have, because if somebody wants to come in now to apply for a license for a TV station, he'll be told no, there are no, there are no signals. But now with the digital, you have a wider, you have a wider, you'll have a wider variety. More people, more stations can actually now apply and have signals, to frequencies to broadcast, right? Of course, that means therefore that there'll have to be a lot of content, much more than what we're even thinking of now. Now, that content, of course, the question will be, where will that content come from? Now, are those stations going to be buying the content from the international markets, from other countries, or are they going to produce? So that's the big question. But definitely, the digital migration promises a lot of opportunities for content development.
As a producer, what are some of the challenges you think we might encounter during the switch off to the digital transmission?
Definitely, it's how we, the kind of facilities shall be used to produce. Because see, when you're talking about digital, the stations would require that actually you use, formats, recording formats that are actually of high quality. So producers will also have to do what? To shift and make sure they're actually shooting and editing on high-end formats. Like for example, if you produce a program in Kenya here for a station, like for example in Europe, like if it's BBC, they'll always insist on a particular format that you have to use.
Thank you very much. That has been Ngolo Wakea, who has been taking us through to what we should expect as we switch off from analog to digital transmission. This has been the Executive Wing.
In the money markets, the Kenya shilling continues to hold steady as the market awaits August inflation figures. To the greenback, the shilling has been exchanging at an average of 84.11, while to the sterling pound, it's trading at 132.96. Against the euro, the home unit is exchanging at 105.64, while closer home to the South African rand, it's posting a mean of 10.01. Well, that's all we had time for this Wednesday. Let's do it again next week. Remember that you can send in your comments or questions to the email address ktnbizweekly@standardmedia.co.ke or a text message to 8041. From myself and the entire KTN Business Weekly team, thank you for watching. I'm Michael Oyer. Good night.
Business Weekly, brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.